The boogeyman is coming.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
We have eternity to know your flesh.
Piss your pants. I said, piss your pants.
I think we just picked up Dracula.
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
You go right on you.
Stay when you're down here with me. You love soul! My family's always been in me.
Our whole family are Draculas.
So, horror movies.
Yeah, horror movies, dude. I love them.
Yeah, man. For those who are listening, my guest this week is my friend Trevor Charity.
Hello.
This week? I don't know if it's this week. This thing doesn't come out quite that often, I guess.
This month, decade, millennia, whichever one applies.
Right. So, man, I told you to pick a movie that you liked, and you picked The Thing. What made you pick this movie?
Well, The Thing has been kind of a staple for me when it comes to horror movies. Like, this movie, for me, it's the standout. I think, granted, I love Halloween, I love Friday the 13th, I love all the slashers, but in terms of pure terror and dread, I think The Thing is up there. It's number one for me.
I understand why it would be, man. The Thing's a fucking great movie that I think gets slept on a little bit.
Absolutely. It didn't do good when it first came out, but I think it was I don't want to call it a slow burn, but it's a classic.
Well, man, there's a lot of reasons why it didn't do good when it first came out, and not one of them have to do with it being a bad movie.
Yeah, I agree.
So let's dive right into this thing. This thing.
Hi-oh.
Yeah, I feel like there's going to be a lot of that in this episode. So The Thing, 1982, directed by John Carpenter, produced by a lot of fucking people, but namely David Foster and Lawrence Truman. The screenplay, written by Bill Lancaster, based on an original story by John W. Campbell Jr. The music by Morricone. Amazing. Cinematography, Badine Cundy. Effects by Rob Bottin. Distributed by Universal Pictures. So, man, this movie was kind of in development hell for a long time.
Really?
Yeah. So when I first started looking into this movie, and I've watched The Thing for years and never once thought about what went into this thing being made, I was kind of surprised to see the backstory on it that so it started being developed by David Foster and Lawrence Truman in the mid 70s. So long before John Carpenter had made Halloween, they bought the rights to the film from Wilbur Stark, which is why he has an executive producer credit on the film and on all the advertising. Mm-hmm. Apparently he had owned the rights. He was I forget if it was that he himself was a Wall Street guy or if he had got them second party from a Wall Street guy, but he had the rights to 23 different RKO Pictures films. One of them was The Thing from Another World.
Right. And I think another one was King Kong, because I know King Kong was an RKO Pictures film that RKO owned. So I'm wondering that was one of them too. But
let me take a look. So if it was, he didn't take a credit on it.
Right.
He had credits on like Vampire Circus,
Mm-hmm.
and the Cat People,
Okay.
and The Thing. So they get the rights for that, and they have a number of different people work on this film before, like even before John Carpenter is using a clip of the Thing from Another World in Halloween. They had like Tobe Hooper working on a version of this film. And they ended up not liking Tobe Hooper's vision for the Thing at all. He apparently put it underwater.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. So that they didn't like it. They had tried to get people like John Landis to work on it. He passed on doing it. And Stuart Cohen had went to UCLA Film School with John Carpenter. So he was working as in a producer role on the film at that point and asked John to come in and do it. And John Carpenter initially was not real into the idea of making this movie. He was a big fan of the Howard Hawks Thing from Another World.
Yeah.
And he just didn't think that there was anything that he could do that would be better than what Hawks had done. Now, I am not the biggest fan of that Howard Hawks film,
Right.
in the way that John Carpenter is. What do you think about that movie?
I thought it was good for for the time, because it was pretty much a B horror sci-fi film, and it was very interesting because the film, it kind of like, while the Thing is the main antagonist, the human antagonist was the scientists, and the protagonist was the military. And it's kind of like a polar opposite with a lot of films. It's like, the military is usually the ones who are gun rushing in to try to find a solution, while the scientists hang back to try to find an alternative solution that benefits everybody. But in this film, it was the scientists are like, well, they're trying to protect the Thing, but the military is like, no, we can't. This thing's going to kill us all. And ultimately, it turns out the military was right in that movie. And the film was also kind of like, also had like a lot of reflective of McCarthyism in it. And it actually, it's interesting because the Thing from Another World is the polar opposite kind of also of the Thing, because in the film, the whole crew the whole military crew worked together to try to attack the creature, which you hardly ever see in the film. Like, it's always been backlit, or it's always in the dark, or a quick shot of it. While in this film, everyone's paranoid, and then same time you get a full view of what the creature looks like.
Yeah, and there's very few things that parallel between the two movies either. The one thing is like there's the creature's caught on fire in the original one,
Mm-hmm.
which holds true very much in the Thing. But it was like in looking into that movie a little bit, that was like one of the first live burns on film.
Yeah. And then also the interesting thing of it too was they didn't use any lighting. They used the flame as the light, which is pretty bolden because the film was not going fast. It's not as fast as like what modern day film goes. So it was a big risk, because for all you know, the whole shot could have been ruined, and then that whole burn could have been a waste.
Right. He instead of focusing on the Hawks film because he didn't think that there was anything he could do with that, he refocused on the source material with John W. Campbell Jr.'s Who Goes There. And I think that was the key to this movie being good. That he took an approach like, man, I'm not for remakes either. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sort of in that same category with John Carpenter, where like you really need to be bringing something to the table. Like, there's no reason to just make a movie again,
Right, exactly. Don't retread, trail that's already been, followed,
Right. And what's funny is, with one of his own movies, with Halloween, Rob Zombie sort of tried to blaze a different trail and in turn made people really angry.
Right, right.
They were like, oh no, you know what? Maybe not a different trail.
Yeah, you're damned if you did, damned if you don't, you know?
Right. But I also think it's interesting that, and I think part of this is because John Carpenter makes sure his name's at the top of every movie.
Right.
But a lot of people, including myself forever, also assumed that John Carpenter wrote this movie. And that's not true at all.
Mm-hmm.
John Carpenter did not write the movie. He brought in Bill Lancaster, who was Burt Lancaster's son. That dude had basically only written Bad News Bears before this, which is such a weird career arc to write the Bad News Bears and then The Thing.
Yeah, it's like...
Yeah, it's a fucking a weird jump from one to the other. But he was super into writing this film and sold John Carpenter on him being the guy to write it. He actually, in like the little synopsis he gave John Carpenter as his pitch to be able to write the movie, had the scene where Norris' chest opens up and he bites the arms off.
Oh, well, that's the shot to sell anybody on.
And the blood tests.
Yeah, that's another good scene. I love that scene. That's actually probably my favorite scene in the whole movie.
Yeah, it's great. So all that stuff came from Bill Lancaster. It wasn't really John Carpenter. I mean, John brought it to life, obviously, but that's what sold John Carpenter on having the Bad News Bears guy write his sci-fi horror film. So when it comes to the cast on this thing, like as it's in development, John Carpenter fought for a lot of stuff on this. I used something I didn't touch on in the beginning, and I think I forgot to do this on a couple of the movies, but some of the resources I used, obviously IMDb and the Wikipedia pages. There's a lot of information on there, and for as shitty as Wikipedia is for some stuff, it tends to have pretty good information on a lot of films. The other thing that was a great resource is the new Blu-ray of The Thing has so many good special features. A lot of little documentaries, like anything between like 15 minutes and an hour on the special effects, on casting, on the experience of like working with the dogs and the wolf, the experience of just like filming in those conditions. And there's a fucking really cool sit down interview with John Carpenter. So if you want to see where a lot of this information came from, a ton of it came out of the special features on the Blu-ray. It is one of the nicest sets of special features I've seen on a Blu-ray release in a while.
Yeah, I touched that thing like about 5 times, like since I owned it, and I still barely scratched the surface on that thing.
Yeah, dude, it's incredible the stuff that's on there. Shout out to Ed Battis for sending me over all that stuff. So as he's putting things together, he's making some demands of Universal that are a little surprising, because they originally, when they sent him over his deal, told him that, you know, they had complete creative control, right? Which is pretty standard. And he said, well, I'm not working on the film, if that's the case. Like he called their bluff. And, you know, for him not wanting to do this because it was a remake, he had decided, I mean, long before he was calling Universal's bluff, he had decided that, like, this was his shot to make a real studio picture. You know, this was something that was going to be funded by Universal, and everything that he had done up to this point had essentially been an independent film. Like, Halloween was an independent film. He had done The Fog and Escape from New York, and his small piece of the TV version of Halloween that he shot during Halloween 2's filming. Is what he had done prior to getting this film. None of those movies are a studio film. None of them are a big studio film. So For him, this was his chance to kind of make his mark. And you can see what Universal was doing in the guys that they courted for this project prior to it. It was all guys who, and this, I think, was a big part of John Carpenter's demise in the long run, was they were all guys who had made a very successful horror film on a budget that wasn't enormous. So like Tobe Hooper, Texas Chainsaw.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that movie didn't have like a wild budget. You know, it wasn't like a fucking huge special effects.
Right. It's not like a horror movie of today where like it has full backing of like, you know, the.
Yeah. It was done on the cheap and it was effective and it made a lot of money. Halloween, done on the cheap, made a lot of money. Even John Landis, to an extent, I mean, he had done like a lot of comedy, but he had done an American Werewolf in London. And for the amount of effects that were in that movie, he had managed to turn a profit still. So, you know, they were definitely financially minded when it came to who they wanted to bring in for this film. And that in the end bit Carpenter in the ass, I think, because the studio had some lofty expectations for profits and costs. And as we'll see, John Carpenter didn't really come in on budget on this film. So he pushed to have creative control. He also pushed to kind of work with the people he wanted to work with. And one of the people that he absolutely wanted to work with was Dean Cundey. And his entire crew. And it got his entire crew into the studio system. It got him into the studio system. Dean Cundey has an amazing resume. And he's a guy that, you know, if you just watch horror films, you never hear his name, right? Or movies in general. You don't hear his name. He's not a guy you would know. His resume is incredible. He is one of the best cinematographers maybe that has done the job in the last 40 years. Now, before working with John, he primarily did exploitation stuff. A lot of stuff I like, but exploitation stuff. Like, he did Black Shampoo. He did The Human Tornado. He did Ilsa Harem Keeper of the Oil Sheiks, the much less talked about Ilsa sequel.
Oh, I missed it.
A lot of people did. A lot of people missed Harem Keeper of the Oil Sheiks. He did, however, get a big upswing in his career after working with John Carpenter on Halloween. So John brought him back and had him do The Fog and Escape from New York and Halloween 2. He also, in that window between Halloween and The Thing, did Rock and Roll High School. After The Thing, he took a whole nother level of growth in his career.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now, and it's pretty freaking impressive.
It's insane. So he does Big Trouble in Little China, and this isn't necessarily in order, but like that's really the only other thing he gets to do with John Carpenter, because he's busy doing like Back to the Future 1, 2, and 3, Roger Rabbit, Roadhouse, Hook, Jurassic Park, Apollo 13. Like, he got Oscar nominations for cinematography. The dude's pretty incredible. And he is a big part of why this movie looks as good as it does, and why the special effects look as good as they do, is the way he lit them and the way he shot them. He is an important part of all the John Carpenter movies that I love. And he is a fantastic cinematographer that doesn't get talked about enough. But like anybody, everything they do can't be a winner.
Right.
Dean Cundey, some of his later work kind of fell off. He worked on the movie Garfield.
Oh, I love that film. Why are you saying it's bad? Well, I don't understand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, he worked on the movie Garfield. He also worked with the Sandman on Jack and Jill.
God.
from what I can see, that one pretty much tanked the career.
Oh, good. I would think Nothing But Trouble would be it, but.
Oh man, you gonna shit on Nothing But Trouble? Nothing But Trouble's got to be better than Garfield.
I mean, yeah, it's better than that, but it's Nothing But Trouble.
Oh man, I like Nothing But Trouble. They all can't be winners, Trevor. They all can't be winners. You got to have your Nothing But Troubles. I like Nothing But Trouble. So the big star of this movie, we're going to talk about the cast, but I think the star of the film is really the special effects. Like,
absolutely.
This is 1982. Like, people really need to go back and look at, like, what special effects really looked like before 82 and around 82, even after 82. Like, basically, Tom Savini was making some pretty good looking stuff. But nothing wild. You know what I mean? Like, once you get to, like, Day of the Dead, the special effects from Savini take a huge jump.
Right.
But this is, like, Savini in 78's doing, like, you know, fucking gray zombies.
Yeah, yeah.
We're in 82. It's 3 years later, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so Rob Bottin at like 23 or 24 years old lands the special effects job. He's running the special effects for the Thing, right? And he fucking knocked it out of the park. He was super young. He had worked on, like, Piranha before this, which not exactly a huge special effects feat there in Piranha.
Right.
He had done The Fog, which The Fog has decent special effects, and it's where he got his relationship with John Carpenter. But most importantly, he did The Howling.
Oh, I love The Howling.
Yeah, and so he did all those, like, the metamorphosis effects in The Howling.
Right.
Which now look a little janky, just like An American Werewolf in London sort of looks a little janky, right? Like, it's a product of its time. It's not like Ray Harryhausen. Like, it's not that primitive, but it's more primitive than what you would have now. So that the fact that he had been able to do that helped John be able to sell the studio on him being the guy to helm the effects on the Thing. And we'll talk about those effects in detail for a minute, but Rob Bottin fucking made a career for himself basically on this movie. After this, he goes on to do Legend, which, if you're not hip to Legend, I don't know if you are. Do you know that film?
Yeah, yeah. And actually, that actually kind of makes a lot of sense, because I'm thinking of Legend now, and I'm like, so he's responsible for turning Tim Curry into the devil. So
yeah. So
it's really amazing.
Yeah. He also did RoboCop.
Oh, well, okay, RoboCop that's fucking amazing too. Like all the shit that they did to I forget his name, Wellner.
Peter Weller.
Peter Weller. Yeah, I'm having a stroke. Sorry.
Yeah, the shit in RoboCop. There's a ton of special effects in that movie that look great. There's also the Ed 209 that looks very Ray Harryhausen-ish.
Oh yeah.
But then he did Total Recall.
Oh, okay.
So he gave us Aquato. He gave us Three Boobs. He gave us that fucking weird thing opening on Arnold's head when he's in that fucking suit.
He gave us Arnold on Mars.
Yeah. Man, Rob Bottin did an amazing job. He also did Seven. He did Fear and Loathing. He did Fight Club. So he did a lot of special effects. But they all can't be winners. He also worked with the Sandman.
Oh, man.
On Mr. Deeds.
What did he do with that? I can't think of anything that was like practical effects.
So that's the weird thing is he it looks like probably just to get some work at times.
Right.
He did some movies that didn't have a lot of like crazy special effects because he also did like Basic Instinct.
Okay.
And some stuff like that's not really like special effects intensive.
Right. Because I don't remember anybody turning into a fucking ghoulish creature into that movie.
No, I think Mr. Deeds had some like weird I haven't seen Mr. Deeds for a long time, but I'm sure it had some effects. The key point is it was one of the last movies he did effects for. Okay. So it seems like if you worked with John Carpenter on this movie and then worked with the Sandman, that was kind of it. Mm-hmm. For whatever you're doing. Like your stop with Adam Sandler was your last stop on the trip.
Right. If your name's not Rob Schneider, you don't have a career anymore.
Does Rob Schneider have a career?
I don't know. He calls it a career, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard of anything that dude's done in a decade.
No, except for being a dick. That's all.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. He is kind of a dick these days, huh?
Yeah.
So the original budget that was allotted for this movie was $10 million. That is not what the budget ends up being. The real budget ends up being $15 million. But of that $10 million, Universal had originally allotted $200,000 for Rob Bottin's special effects, for creature effects. It was the most that Universal Pictures had ever allotted for a monster film.
How that seems ridiculous because they're so responsible for all the Universal monsters. That seems ridiculous.
But none of those old monsters cost shit to make, man.
Oh yeah, you got a point because everything's black and white, so you can't put a lot of detail into a lot of this makeup.
Right, and there just wasn't a lot of detail. I mean, there weren't these big, huge special effects. I mean, Dracula essentially is just Lugosi with some makeup on.
Right.
The Mummy is minimal makeup. Invisible Man, minimal makeup. Frankenstein's a big makeup job. The Wolfman's a big makeup job.
Gilman.
And the creature, and you've got a couple of versions of that creature suit, but none of that shit would have approached $200,000. I don't think even with inflation.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point in 82, it's the most Universal had ever sunk into a monster movie. The estimate once they got into the film that Carpenter sent back to them was probably going to come in closer to $750,000 instead of the $200,000. So more than triple the most that Universal had ever agreed to spend on a monster film, which I'm sure to the folks at Universal was crazy. But he brought them in and he had them look at some of the stuff that Rob Bottin was doing and how many people he had working for him to make this happen. And they said, okay. That budget went way over and ended up being $1.5 million. $1.5 million in 1982 money. So that would really turn into somewhere in the neighborhood of $6 million.
Jesus.
In today's money. And a very far cry from the $200,000 that Universal had originally allotted. But I think it pays off because those effects are they the star of this movie. They are everywhere and they look amazing at all times. Like the effects in this film, the practical effects hold up to this day because of how good they are and because of the way they were shot and lit.
Right. And it's amazing, like, even like how original a lot of the stuff is. Cause like when you run into like a lot of monsters, like you kind of, they run into like, oh, well, this monster looks like this one. This looks like something straight off a fucking horror. Like a lot of this stuff, like actually looks like a lot of like H.P. Lovecraft monsters.
Yeah. So you can tell looking at some of this stuff that like Rob Bottin clearly had looked at like some H.R. Giger stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot of like what would be biomechanics if it weren't that it was all just bio.
Right.
But it's his ability to be able to make things look authentic as like, oh, you could tell that that's part of a dog that it's trying to create.
Right. It's like all flesh and bone and just mucus and just everything you could imagine in a horror, like a nightmare.
Oh, dude, so much Ultra Slime. Like, Ultra Slime is, for those not in the know, Ultra Slime is just a liquid gel stuff used in special effects that, like, when the alien opens its mouth and there are those strings, that's Ultra Slime, and it makes latex look a lot less like latex when it's on it and a lot more like natural.
Mm-hmm.
And there is so much of that used in this movie. In the special effects documentary, they talked about how they had like so many gallons of that stuff laying around, and so they used like an insane amount of foam latex in making this movie, like more than anybody who had worked on it had ever seen used on a film ever.
You know, a couple people probably took a couple tubs of that home. You know that.
Oh man, if you're trying to use it for like greasy stuff, that's gonna be, you don't want it. It's real tacky.
Honey, we're gonna have a slip and slide in the backyard this year.
Oh man, you wouldn't slip or slide. It's so tacky. You wouldn't want that. No.
Okay,
like
never mind.
Ultra Slime looks real wet, but it's like sticky as fuck. Like you can't make it go away. It's so awful. If you tried to use it for those kind of purposes, boy, you would hate life for like a while.
Okay, I stand corrected then.
Things would be bad, man. Things would be so bad. You wouldn't want that at all. So the special effects are absolutely a cast member, but they're not the only cast member. The cast of this movie is wild. Like when you look at some of the people who were in it and then you kind of connect the dots as to where some of them, like there's a lot of times where people that were part of this cast end up working together on other things later.
Right. And I was gonna say and a lot of these guys are actually, looking at the cast, a lot of these guys actually appear in other John Carpenter films too.
Well, and that's the thing with John Carpenter, man, is if he finds people he likes to work with, he likes to keep working with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a huge thing for him, where he's got like people who are John Carpenter people who work on John Carpenter films. So casting of this movie kind of went backwards from what you would think that it would be. You would usually, like, the main character, I think we would all agree, is MacReady, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So that was the last role cast.
Really?
Yeah. That was the last role cast, and Kurt Russell was like the farthest thing from the first choice for the role.
Right. Because I heard actually he was involved with the production even before casting.
So he was. He had helped John Carpenter flush some stuff out. He had like read against people when they came in to read roles, but like the studio had a much different idea of who it should be. They had like dudes like Christopher Walken, Jeff Bridges, Nick Nolte. All of those guys were either unavailable or declined.
Okay. I want to stop right. One of those three sound like a possible answer, and that's Jeff Bridges. But Christopher Walken and Nick Nolte?
Dude, I can't imagine this movie with Christopher Walken in it. I cannot. So
there's this creature who's coming around attacking people.
Like I don't even know. Like that's such a weird casting move for this. Like
right.
it doesn't make sense. Nick Nolte I can kind of see.
Right.
Like
he could seem like a loose cannon.
Yeah, and like Jeff Bridges, this isn't like. You also have to remember that like in your head you're probably picturing like the dude.
Right.
No, this is like 10 years before that. This is like super clean cut Jeff Bridges.
This is Tron Jeff Bridges.
Yeah. Like that dude doesn't really make sense in this to me either. But all those guys thankfully either declined or were unavailable. One of my favorites, although certainly not a lot of star power, Tom Atkins was a contender before they opted for the recognition and reliability of Kurt Russell.
Right.
But Tom Atkins is another John Carpenter guy. He's worked with Carpenter a couple of times, and at different points they had This is my favorite shit, man. I love looking at what might have been with movies.
Right.
And like, because it shows you like how fucking lucky it is when something turns out to be good. At different points, they wanted Brian Dennehy, Chris Christopherson, John Hurd, Ed Harris, and Tom Berenger. All those dudes were met with about playing MacReady.
Oh my gosh.
Brian Dennehy.
Oh my God.
Like, I see. So when you see how Kurt Russell looks in the role, I see where Chris Christopherson, you know what I mean? Like, I can see.
Right.
I see where they were like, oh, well, Chris Christopher. And he was like fairly popular at the time.
Right.
But man, this is one of those roles, but I feel this way about most things Kurt Russell does. It's one of those roles where I really can't picture anybody else playing that role.
Right. Like Kurt Russell, when he gets a role, you immediately like, he's perfect. He's that character.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes it seem silly that anybody else would have ever been considered.
Right. And it's actually crazy, like, to think about Kurt Russell, because he could have been Han Solo.
Yeah. Yeah, he could have. That's absolutely true. He very much almost was.
Yeah.
So for Childs, it was a little bit different. Childs, they didn't have half of Hollywood meet to see if they were going to do it. But Keith David, not the first choice for the role. They had Carl Weathers and Isaac Hayes, because Isaac Hayes had just worked with John Carpenter, along with Ernie Hudson, considered before they met with Keith David.
Right, and I like to say Keith fucking David because it's Keith fucking David.
Yeah, I'll support that. I'll support it being Keith fucking David. He had essentially been a stage actor before this, which is true for a couple of the cast members. But the thing really sparked Keith David's career. I think it's amazing what he followed the thing up with. Now, if you're just looking at movies, you would say, oh, he went from The Thing to Platoon. And that's sort of true. But what he really did was go from The Thing to Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
What? Wait, hold on. What?
Yeah.
Get Summers in here. What?
He went from The Thing in 82 to 83 to 85. He's on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Now, there's two ways that you can look at that. One is that The Thing did him so dirty that he couldn't get a role that wasn't on children's television. But when you see what he did afterwards, you can see that that's not really the case. I don't know what it was, but yeah, he was Keith the Handyman on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood from 83 to 85.
Oh my God.
He was on like 9 episodes of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah. But he went on to do Platoon, Missing in Action 3, They Live. Man, his role in They Live is amazing.
Right.
But he also Roadhouse, another crossover. Like, there's so much of that, and I think it is part of like once you get in that like the cult of John Carpenter or whatever it is, where like there's this group of people, they all seem to just like help each other get work all the time.
Yeah.
But there reaches a point for Keith David where he doesn't do so much movie or TV work, like on-screen work anymore, and he becomes a pretty prevalent voice actor. He's the voice of Goliath in Gargoyles.
A classic.
Yeah. He did a lot of little one-spots for Disney. I'm sure because, he was a voice on Gargoyles and they needed to find other shit. There's always like little things on animated shows that if you already have a guy in your system, you can just have him come in and do shit.
Yeah.
So he worked on like the Timon and Pumbaa TV series. He did voices for Princess Mononoke. He did the voice of Spawn and Todd McFarlane's Spawn.
Oh yes, and he also did the new Mortal Kombat video game too for Spawn.
Oh, really? He's the voice of Spawn in that game?
Yes, and also to go off video games, for those who love Halo, he is also the voice of the Arbiter. If anyone knows who the Arbiter is.
I don't know who the Arbiter is.
He's kind of a big deal in that game, so don't worry.
I got you. Yeah, not a Halo guy. I get like motion sickness.
But I don't blame him.
I can't do first person shooters.
I can't do getting yelled at by little kids, so.
Oh, well, yeah, that's definitely a thing.
Right. And everyone keeps telling me of my mother's sexual advances, so I'm tired of hearing it.
Oh, man. Yeah, you never want to hear about your mom's sex life, especially from like an 11-year-old.
Right. Especially one that's named like Swagmaster 6969. So.
You always know you're playing against a fully grown adult when his name
exactly.
Swagmaster 6969. Yeah, so I mean, Keith David hasn't done like a lot of high profile stuff since the 80s, but he's worked a lot doing voices. And he's done a lot of like now that I look through this, he did a lot of video game work that I wasn't really aware of. The series Saints Row, he did a bunch. He was the voice of Nick Fury in the Marvel Experience.
Okay. Did not know that, but that's cool.
The one thing that he did do that I'm a fan of, it was like one of the, and he's done a lot of like, again, he still does a lot of animation, like just little shit like, here's a spot on Uncle Grandpa. And not animation, but he did Black Jesus.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, he did some episodes of Black Jesus. So he's done a lot of Adult Swim shit. But he was also in like a bunch, like probably like a dozen episodes of Community.
Okay. I haven't watched all of Community yet, but that's actually pretty cool. Selling me on it.
Yeah. Oh, dude, Community is great. Community is really good. You should definitely watch Community.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely planning on it.
Oh yeah, he's on all the hits now apparently. Like I'm looking at the shit that he's doing like from 2015 till now in animation. He's like Ninja Turtles, BoJack Horseman, Adventure Time, We Bare Bears, Rick and Morty, Ben 10.
Yeah, he's locked in. He's got the hits, so.
Yeah, so that's where he's making his money now, is he's doing voice acting. But he really his jump off was The Thing. That's what got him his spot. And he beat out some seasoned dudes for that role. So Keith David, generally an unknown at the time of filming. Another guy who is now very well known for things that have nothing to do with his acting ability was also cast in this movie. And that is Wilford fucking Brimley.
Yes, card carrying member and fellow diabetic.
Yeah, he's pretty well known for diabetes.
Yes. Diabetes.
But when he was cast in The Thing, he was basically a journeyman TV actor, which a lot of the cast had been. But Wilford Brimley from like the 70s, he was on the Waltons, like occasionally, like as a recurring character, but not a main character. He was on like an episode of Kung Fu. He was on an episode of How the West Was Won. He did a lot of Westerns.
Right.
Like a lot of Western TV shows, and just a lot of like, oh, hey, here's a guy in the background.
Right.
So The Thing was a big deal for him. And I think it still kind of probably surprises people if they haven't seen this movie before, they're not expecting him, that the check your blood sugar guy is there on the screen.
Is that the guy from Walker, Texas Ranger?
No, and he basically, like, his career didn't get the same kind of bump that some other people did from The Thing. He essentially, I mean, he was in Cocoon, which was a big deal at the time. But he basically just, kept doing TV shit. He did that Ewok movie. The Ewoks Battle for Endor.
Yes. Oh my god, I forgot about that.
But he had like that Our House TV show and shit in the 80s. You probably don't even remember that.
I don't even know what it is. So.
Yeah, it's nothing, man. It was a bad TV show in the 80s. And he did do Walker Texas Ranger. He did an episode of it. Wilford Brimley did a lot of I'm on this show for one episode. Like he was in an episode of Homicide: Life on the Street. He was on an episode of Seinfeld. He did what looks like to be a bunch of either TV movies or real low budget shit, like running into the late 90s, where these are movies I've never heard of. And like, I know bad movies, and I've never heard of most of these movies. I think a lot of them might have been like Lifetime movies and shit.
Right, like TV movies or like straight to VHS tapes,
Yeah, something. But yeah, Wilford Brimley's career never really took off as an actor, but boy, he is like the face of diabetes.
Yeah. Actually, I think that's how the doctor told me that I had diabetes. Like, you got, and then just showed a picture of Wilford Brimley. Like, shit. So...
funny enough, the reason that he got the role was they wanted somebody who was sort of not recognizable.
Right.
That like wouldn't stand out. And John Carpenter had pushed pretty hard for it to be Donald Pleasance. And it was determined.
Perfect.
Dude, it would have been really cool, but you would have immediately looked at that, like, especially with the knowledge that it's a John Carpenter movie.
Dr. Loomis, what are you doing here?
Yeah. Like, oh man, Loomis is in this movie, and that's what they didn't want to have.
Right.
And you certainly don't do that, and you didn't do it at the time with Wilford Brimley, even with like the diabetes.
Yeah.
So I understand why they did it. But yeah, he didn't quite get the bump that some other people did from working on this movie. For Palmer, Rob Bottin lobbied real hard to get to play the role. He wanted to do it, and his logic was, I'm already going to be there.
Yeah, save you money.
Yeah, but given his responsibilities for special effects and how he was eternally behind on getting shit done for this movie, it was not allowed to happen. So for Palmer, the role that David Clennon got, two wild fucking people auditioned for that role that I cannot imagine what this movie is if either of them get that role. Like, this movie is so fucking different if Gary Shandling is Palmer or Jay fucking Leno.
Oh my god.
Yeah, dude, Jay Leno could have been Palmer in this fucking movie.
Oh my god.
I can't even imagine what that would have been.
Right. Like I could see Gary Shandling maybe having some serious acting chops and being serious, but Jay Leno, like that,
maybe, but either one of them, really, that's fucking weird, right?
Right.
And so now Clennon is a guy that kind of took a role in the thing and made something out of it. Like, he ends up being in The Right Stuff. He ends up on 30-something in like 89 to 91. You probably don't know what 30-something is, huh?
Still all static to me. I don't know what the fuck that is.
Yeah, 30-something was a big deal in like 89 to 91. It was a drama about, people who were 30-something.
Which Olsen twin was in that? I don't know.
It's a little early for an Olsen twin.
Oh, okay.
That might be a little early for an Olsen twin to like even fucking be on TV. I don't know if that show was on yet in 89. Yeah, it probably was.
Right.
I think by 89 it was. I'm not going to look that up.
Okay.
I don't. There's a strict no Bob Saget rule on this show.
Oh, Bob Saget.
That's not true at all. There's no Bob Saget. But so yeah, he did a lot of TV after this. He parlayed it into having like a and I'm on like a lot of TV shows kind of thing. Usually not a lead, but another guy who shows up reoccurring, but not a main character. Now, for Gary, there are some wild people who auditioned for that role that Donald Moffat eventually gets. But so look, it would have been fucking weird if Jay Leno or Gary Shandling were in this fucking movie, right?
Yeah.
It would have been weird if Christopher Walken is in this fucking movie or Brian Dennehy is in this movie. It would have been much less weird if, like, you know, Carl Weathers or Isaac Hayes had got Keith David's role. Would it have been as good? No, I don't think either of those guys are as good of an actor as Keith David.
Right.
However, this is the one spot where, as much as I like Donald Moffat, and as much as I think he did a great job as Gary in this movie, I think he did as good of a job as you could ever ask anyone to do doing a role. And he was one of the few guys in this cast who was a seasoned actor. Like, he had at that point been in a lot of TV and a lot of movies prior to being in The Thing. Including he had just been in like Popeye a couple of years before that. He was on like the Logan's Run TV series.
Right.
Episodes of $6 Million Man. Like he was on like fucking Mannix and Gunsmoke and shit. Bonanza. The Mission Impossible TV show, the original Hawaii Five-0. Like he was a guy who was just like a journeyman TV actor. And he did a fine job. And, you know, there's nothing to really complain about. However, imagine if that had been Powers Booth.
Not to sound ignorant, but who's Powers Booth?
Are you fucking kidding me?
Fortunately, name does not ring a bell.
You don't know who Powers Booth is?
No, I do not.
Aw, man, if you saw Powers Booth, you would immediately know who he is.
I'm looking at it. Okay. Yep. I know who Powers Booth is now. Fucking Curly Bill.
Yeah.
Oh, and also he's in Deadwood too. I forgot. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now it's starting to sound familiar. All right. I apologize, ladies and gentlemen.
He's also, you like all the fucking Marvel movies.
Oh God. Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. He's the. Yep. Mm-hmm. I'm dumb.
He was also, as a Van Damme fan, I have to point out that he was in Sudden Death, the let's shoot a movie in the igloo that the Pittsburgh Penguins used to play in movie.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I feel
but
stupid.
Yeah. So Powers Booth. I hope you know this next one, man. It could have been Lee Van Cleef.
What?
Oh man, tell me you know who Lee Van Cleef is.
Yeah, I know who Lee Van Cleef. I know who Lee Van Cleef is.
I really did not want to have to explain who Lee Van Cleef was.
No, I
yeah, man, it could have fucking been Lee Van Cleef.
That's nuts.
I couldn't find any details, but my assumption is it wasn't Lee Van Cleef because they didn't want to pay Lee Van Cleef the money that he would have wanted.
Right.
That's the only reason I can dream of why it wasn't Lee Van Cleef.
Right. You can't have the antagonist from The Good, Bad, and the Ugly.
Yeah. It won't. I'm guessing he wanted too much money. But
yeah, absolutely.
Because that's not even a role where they were worried about somebody being recognizable. That's just a matter of I think they weren't able to pay him. I mean, that had to be it. The other person who was considered for that role, who also, and again, I think that the role was played as well as it could be, but it could have been Jerry Orbach. Who is Jerry Orbach?
Yeah, who is Jerry Orbach?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Sorry.
Not a Law and Order fan?
Not really, no.
Yeah, he played Briscoe on Law and Order forever.
Okay, yeah.
from 91 until 2004.
Mm-hmm.
And he played the same role on Homicide: Life on the Street before that.
Okay. See, you know why? Because it doesn't have it's not SVU. That's why I watched more SVU than actual Law and Order.
He was on SVU.
Oh, Jesus.
And Criminal Intent. He's been on like, and Trial by Jury. I think he was on like every Law and Order.
Okay.
I think he was on every Law and Order. But yeah, he was on some episodes of SVU. He's one of those guys that was in that same situation as Kelsey Grammer, where they are up for a record for playing like the same character for the longest period of time.
Right.
He played Briscoe and over like multiple different shows. Like he played Briscoe on Homicide, which wasn't technically like related to Law and Order at all.
Right, I gotcha.
But that has nothing to do with The Thing, other than the fact that he almost got the role of Gary instead of Donald Moffat. But again, I think it was done as well as it could have been. That's the one spot where like any of those guys, it would have been really fucking cool. Another funny story in this is Richard Mazur. He takes his role in this movie, but he was up for another role at the same time. He plays Clark, right?
Right.
So he was up for another film. They were both going to start filming around the same time. And he turns down one to do the other. He takes The Thing and turns down E.T.
See, it's really kind of weird because they're both alien movies, but obviously which one alien is kind of like more well loved than the other alien freaks fucking kids out.
Yeah, so here's the thing. Those two movies are gonna be entwined with each other forever. And it's interesting that he picked The Thing and not E.T. because long term he made the right choice. But he had to think he fucked up when both movies were out, which we'll get to. And he, in another one of the things where people get people jobs and people from this movie end up on the same shows as other people, he went on to have a very good TV career after The Thing. He ended up with a role in Risky Business, which is the only other like big movie that he really got. He didn't get a lot of huge movie roles. He had like spots in License to Drive and My Girl. But his big thing, the big show that he had, was L.A. Law.
I know L.A. Law.
Yeah, he did a lot of different appearances as like different characters on L.A. Law. He did Picket Fences. He's had a decent TV career. He even ended up having to dip his toe down into some daytime soaps at a point. And he also had a lot of spots. He was in like 5 or 6 episodes of Orange is the New Black. So I mean, he's still working.
Yeah, he was in also 2 episodes of The Simpsons. He played Kit.
Oh, nice. I like it anytime somebody's on The Simpsons.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of people in this that ended up on TV in different roles, doing different stuff. But I think the casting overall was done about as well as it could have been. There's not anybody that I would have been like, with the exception of you could have had fucking Lee Van Cleef.
Yeah.
I think they made a lot of really good decisions. Not a lot of guys became big stars, like huge stars after this, but a lot of them went on to have like really long television careers. And you can really see where a lot of them, and they talk about this as like they kind of formed like a little fraternity because of all the time they had to spend together, being in the conditions that they were in Alaska, that you can see they've all helped each other over the years, because a lot of them end up in the same TV shows. A lot of them end up in the same movies, and it goes from like the cast through to the crew as well.
Right.
Where a lot of them have all ended up doing some of the same shit as time went on. Now, there is one female cast member. You never see her. And she's not, I guess, really a cast member. But the only female voice in the film belongs to Adrienne Barbeau. She is the voice of the chess computer.
Okay, yeah.
And she was also John Carpenter's wife at the time. So it was pretty easy for her to land the role.
Mm-hmm, yeah. Well, you're nailing the director.
The big role of voice of chess computer.
I mean, I have action figures of her in my house right now. So I don't.
Of Adrienne Barbeau?
Oh no, of the computer.
Oh, okay. So you do have a figure of Adrienne Barbeau.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and so that's a point that the movie got a little pushback on. I mean, the movie got fucked with by critics pretty hard.
Right.
And one of the big points that it was kind of shots were taken at it for was the fact that it didn't have female cast members. Mm-hmm. And John Carpenter's talked about how it was a conscious choice to not do it because he felt like it would change the dynamic that was created by it just being dudes alone in this desolate place.
Right.
Because technically it's Antarctica. It obviously, like movie magic, this wasn't filmed in Antarctica. Yeah. But it was filmed, part of the movie was filmed on location in a really harsh climate. And it brought the cast together in a way that John Carpenter, in multiple interviews, I've seen him talk about how he wouldn't change that choice.
Right. Actually, I think at one point, Bowden actually got ammonia on during production. I remember him talking about that and how he had to struggle with that.
Yeah. A few people got sick during the filming of this. So let's talk about the filming of this movie now that we've talked about everything that led up to it. So he's got his cast together. He's got his special effects team together. He's prepared for this. Principal photography on the movie begins August 24th, 1981 in Juneau, Alaska. Now, there were also scenes filmed on a soundstage in Hollywood, and there were scenes filmed at the special effects studio. The Juneau, Alaska shooting is all of the dog, the helicopter chasing the dog, all that kind of stuff. So they start filming in Juneau. Juneau, they film all of the dog, the helicopter chasing the dog.
Right, all the outside stuff that during the day.
Well, not even all the outside stuff during the day. Only the stuff that doesn't take place at the base.
Okay.
Because the base is built in a different location that they end up going to. But the Juneau stuff was like all B-roll stuff. They didn't have to have many of the actors. It was a small crew that went, John Carpenter being one of them. And they actually stayed at a Air Force base in Juneau. They filmed all of that up there. Then John Carpenter insisted on 2 weeks of rehearsals because he wanted to make sure that everybody was comfortable with each other and that everything felt really natural. This was highly unusual at the time. I think it's probably still considered pretty unusual, but it happened. So after they film in Juneau, after they film all the B-roll, there's not really any stories from that other than the one dog, Jed, was part wolf, and apparently everybody was very on edge around that dog all the time. However, it was an amazing fucking actor. Like, anybody who worked with the dog praised the dog on how good of an actor it was. And like, if you've listened to or read into anything about like making films, the two things people always talk about being horrible to work with are animals and kids. And apparently that wolf dog was just fantastic to work with, but scary as fuck.
That's good. Actually, I heard some people even quote saying he was a good boy.
Yeah, I bet he was a good boy. I mean, he hit his mark all the time.
Right. Very professional. Did not pee on set.
Yeah. So they go from Juneau to the Universal lot. Now, this is where people got sick. It wasn't the filming in Alaska that did it. It was filming on the Universal lot. They recreated all the interiors on the lot. It was in the summer. It was 100 degrees outside.
Jesus.
Now, these guys are shooting a film depicting it being winter in Antarctica. The scenes that they're going to film up north, they're wearing parkas and it's cold.
Right.
But outside in LA, it's 100 degrees. So John Carpenter made the call that the sets had to be climate controlled. And it was kept at 28 degrees Fahrenheit.
Jesus.
-2 Celsius.
My God. Why not 55? 55 makes more sense, but okay, whatever.
It existed in a refrigerator, basically. A freezer.
God.
Yeah. They were gonna build the sets inside of an existing, like, a walk-in cooler, basically. And they couldn't find one, so they had to bring in as many portable air conditioners as they could. They closed off the stage. They used humidifiers to add moisture to the air. It was, God. And so as they were filming this, these guys would go from on set where it's 28 degrees to outside where it's 100 degrees.
Oh, God, that's like instant bloody nose right there.
Yeah, and this is all day long for weeks.
Jeez.
Yeah. To top that off, for people being uncomfortable, Keith David broke his wrist. So for half of the movie, you don't see, he broke his hand in a car accident. You don't see his left hand for like half of the film.
Oh, God, now that's gonna bug me. Now when I watch it, I'm gonna look for that left hand.
Yeah, you're not gonna see it. They did an amazing job of hiding it. But he had it in there was like a glove, and then the glove was colored to look natural to his skin tone. But yeah, he had a broken hand with like screws in it.
Jesus.
Like pins in it, yeah. So yeah, they film in this meat locker for a few weeks. And then Carpenter was pretty unhappy with a lot of the scenes of people talking, and he rewrote them to have them moved outside when they moved principal photography to their next location, which was in Stewart, British Columbia.
Okay.
So like specifically some of the scenes where they're all standing around outside talking and making plans, that shit had been shot previously on the soundstage. Nope, didn't like it. There's a lot of stuff. Like, there's so much stuff that was shot for this film that doesn't end up in part of it. There's multiple endings that were shot.
Oh, man, I would love to get my hands on those.
I think a lot of people would, and I think John Carpenter's not going to let that happen.
I'd be surprised, because that would probably make bank. Like, I would buy that copy immediately.
Yeah, I think I kind of see his point in not, and they might be. I didn't look through all the special features on this. They might have been on that new Blu-ray, but I don't think so. But I know he talked about it, about filming the different final scenes.
Mm-hmm.
I like the one that they picked. I'm of the belief that I don't need to know. Other people, including test audiences, did not feel the same way. So the shoot in British Columbia, when they scouted that area, it was summer. So they scouted it and they built the base. Like, all of that was built. None of that existed. That was all constructed from scratch. The outdoor set. They built it in the summer and then let winter happen. And it was built like next to a glacier. It looked amazing, but it was very remote. The area of British Columbia it was in was just like a little mining town. The crew being there screwed up the housing availability for the miners. So there was a little bit of tension, I guess, between that and like the town only had like one bar. And they all kind of hung out there. And the road to get to set was pretty dangerous. It was just a mining road. And so they had to get bussed in every day. It was a 2-hour bus ride to the set.
Oh God, which I bet they loved to watch. Like all the citizens loved to watch these, Hollywood elites coming through their town and like, oh, look at this guy over here.
Yeah, apparently the biggest issue was when the trucks would leave the mine, they used the same road and they didn't stop for anything. So the bus would get called ahead that, hey, you guys got to get out of the fucking way. And they would sometimes get delayed. Weather delayed shooting up there. There was an incident that a few of the actors talked about where the bus almost went over the edge of an embankment. And like it was real sketchy, and like they all credited Kurt Russell with like real life kind of saving them that day.
Oh my gosh.
Which is wild. But so those guys had this miserable fucking 2-hour bus ride every day. Meanwhile, John Carpenter in some of this stuff disclosed that he got to take a helicopter every day.
Why not?
Yeah, I guess it's the perk of having your name above the title of the movie. You get the helicopter.
Right.
But the shooting conditions up there were rough. It was actual winter. They didn't, I think, realize how rough that was going to be on everything. On the film, on the cameras, on the actors.
Right. 'Cause it's weather's everything.
Yeah. It was rough. The other thing, the movie magic that was done. So when you watch this film, it seems like that outpost is just in the middle of nowhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was very much in the middle of nowhere, but like Antarctica, there shouldn't be trees.
Yeah.
And so there aren't trees in the movie. But the other side, they never shoot one direction on the base.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you did, you would see a forest.
You would literally see, the green on the other side of the hill.
Yeah. Even in that final shot when it's wider out and they blow the place up, it was still shot in a way where you don't see that. Like the trees were to their back.
Right.
Which I like little shit like that. I like seeing that and knowing that like they created a world different than the world that they were even shooting in.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the temperatures were an issue. The wind was an issue. They also realized very quickly that they weren't going to be able to heat the base above freezing.
Oh, Christ.
Because it would melt the snow on the outside and ruin all the exterior shots.
Of course.
Yeah. So, and these guys, like, there are scenes where people are filming with, like, their jackets open and shit, and they had to stand out in those temperatures and film that.
Oh, man.
Lenses would fog over, equipment would break. They were up there for 3 weeks. Heavy snow screwed things up, but they did eventually blow the thing up. Everything that they had built, everything that's there, they blew it right the fuck up. That's real. That's not like a model blowing up. That's
just like, fuck it, we're not going back.
Yeah, that's tons of explosives, and they really blew that fucking thing up. From what I read, it took 8 hours to rig the explosives.
And I bet they're all waiting there, like, once this thing explodes, we're just hanging around the fire. We're just going to warm up and enjoy it.
Well, they really shot the final scene on the set on fire.
Yeah.
Like, after they blew the shit up for real, the final scene of Childs and
McGreedy.
Yeah. The final scene of Childs and McGreedy sitting, having the conversation about, obviously both of them think the other one's the thing.
Right.
That was all shot like on the real shit after it blew up.
That's very, very interesting. And obviously that would make sense. That makes sense a lot,
Right. And so after that, they had to come back and work on the special effects.
Okay.
And do the special effects shots and the special effects lighting. And that was all stuff that the original idea was it was going to happen on set with the actors, either on the sound stage or in a much more limited role up in Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
And it quickly became clear that Bottin was not going to be able to keep up and get everything made at the rate that it needed to be able to shoot everything as the movie was being shot, which is a big portion of why the budget went so high on special effects. It was just the time it was taking. And he had brought in a bunch of people to work on it. He had David Kelsey, he had Ken Diaz, Gunnar Ferdinand, and Margaret Becerra, all working on this with him. And it was still just, it was a lot of work. And I mean, when you think about everything in this movie that is a special effects shot, that's
right.
There's a lot there.
Yeah, exactly. And I can understand why all that care needed to be taken.
Yeah. And Bottin, I mean, he worked himself ragged making this film. He was hospitalized for exhaustion and double pneumonia and a bleeding ulcer.
Oh, Jesus.
All of that.
So he literally put his blood, sweat, and tears into this thing. Literally.
Yeah, because he was taking on anything that he thought was complicated.
Man.
He wasn't delegating shit as much as he should have. Because he was young. I mean, think about when you were in your early 20s. You would just, suck it up and do shit, right?
Right, exactly. And that's why he got so much work after the thing.
Yeah, now one thing that he was very good at is he had a lot of people come in and draw for him. Because he created almost everything based off drawings, right? After he ended up hospitalized, he brought in Stan Winston. You know who Stan Winston is, right?
Yes, I do. Yeah, he did Terminator and Jurassic Park and Predator. His name is all over the place, like Iron Man, Edward Scissorhands.
Yes. So he brought in Stan Winston to complete some of the designs, primarily the dog thing. There wasn't enough time to make a mechanical creature, so it ended up being originally a hand puppet.
Right.
There's a lot of things in the special effects part of this movie that are shot on different scale levels too. So they made like full recreations at a small scale and at a medium scale, and they look identical to the sets.
Man.
Like, I've watched the movie specifically to try to find, like, tells. Pieces where you could be like, oh, no, that's a model.
Right.
And you can't. It's just not there. Everything's done so well. Everything, like, the care and what went into these special effects. Like, I put these special effects up against anything current with all current technology.
I agree. Like a lot of those old 80s practical effects are better than a lot of CGI.
I 100% agree.
It's even better than the sequel, like better than the one that came after in 2011.
I agree. That movie, I only watched it once. I watched it right after it hit the home market. So whenever it was on Blu-ray or DVD originally. And I don't remember a lot of it. It's kind of fuzzy for me, but I do remember specifically thinking when I watched it, like, wow, this movie doesn't look a lot better than a movie that came out in 1982.
Right. Like from what I remember, they actually did a couple of practical effects, but they ended up using a lot more CGI than the practical effects.
Yeah. I'm not surprised. I mean, a lot of movies opt for the CGI version now. And there was a point where it looked really bad. Like, CGI has definitely came a long way, but I think a lot of movies got way too anxious with it way too early. Or they didn't take the time to, like, accurately match shit. Like, there's some stuff in House of a Thousand Corpses and Devil's Rejects. There's like a handful, specifically in Devil's Rejects. There's a handful of non-practical effects spots, and you can see them. They stand out like a sore thumb.
Right.
And everything low budget that tried to do non-practical effects through like the early 2000s, all of that stuff looks terrible. Like all the straight-to-video shit that tried to do digital effects all look terrible.
I mean, even high-budget movies, like look at Scorpion King. Mummy 2, Scorpion King.
Well, yeah, and that's what I'm saying. When I think people got a little too excited about digital effects.
Yeah,
like they got too ahead of themselves. Even, and there are people who will vehemently argue against this, I'm sure, but even the digital effects in the Star Wars prequels look like shit.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna knock the actor of Jar Jar Binks, but Jar Jar Binks looks like shit.
Dude, and I'll go this far too, and this is like beloved shit that I recently caught like 10 minutes of one of the Lord of the Rings movies on TV.
Yeah.
And I specifically remember seeing that shit in theaters and being like, this looks really good. And when I saw it on TV, I was like, this looks like shit.
Yeah, that's the problem with CGI. Like, it's not going to age very well in a few years, because like you'll start seeing look, Endgame. Endgame is not going to look as good as a movie like 5 years from now.
Right, but the key is like blending shit well.
Right.
The thing that I saw from that Lord of the Rings clip, and the Star Wars does the same thing, looks like, have you ever seen the movie Cliffhanger?
Yes.
The Stallone movie?
Yeah. Yep.
It was shot on green screen, and like you can see like the outline around him on every shot. Like it's bad.
I'm gonna have to go back and watch that.
Oh, dude, it's so fucking bad. And all of those movies have that same feel to me.
My gosh.
Yeah, they have that same just like bad superimposed over a background feel.
Mm-hmm.
Like things aren't lit the right way. Things aren't, they're just nothing looks natural. And that's where I think Dean Cundey comes into this so much, is because he lit all of the effects that Bottin was killing himself to make the exact right way.
Right. Yeah. Like like my favorite, like the greatest shots I think were the ones outside, because like it was all lit in that dark blue that looks like a winter night. It looks exactly like a winter night.
Right. And to be honest, he had a little bit of an easy job there because they were far enough north that like the glacier kind of looked blue.
Yes.
On its own. So it was him being able to just kind of enhance that. The stuff that I think's the most impressive is, so obviously the stomach opening up and ripping his arms off. That's really impressive, right?
Yeah.
But then the head peeling off, when the head rips off and there's all of those strings of green shit.
Oh, yeah. That's like all those tentacles like just flailing around. Yeah.
Yeah. It looks, and then it peels off and it becomes the little crawl around guy.
Right. Yeah. Like when Norris's head turns into the head crab, and like it's like you don't fully see it yet. It's like backlit in, so it's just like all in the shadow, but you see it just start to form.
Yeah. There's also, so the original puppet for that got damaged. I don't know if in looking into this movie you saw this story or not.
No, I did not.
But when they were doing the scene for the Norris thing's head to push off, and there's that great fucking shot of all those green strings between the body and the head. Like shit's supposed to be a little bit on fire around them already at that point, right?
I remember that shot because they started, yeah.
So they're getting ready to shoot this, and the fucking thing, the effect that's on the table, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's filled with like wax bones and rubber stuff and jello and all of this shit that's on the inside. Oh, it's worse than that, man. So somebody points out that like, hey, there should be flame here, right?
Right.
So before they do the shot, they hurry up and bring in like a piece that they can light up and have a little bit of flame in front of the camera lens, right?
Right.
So that looks there because they want to do it naturally, right? Like there's no digital effects. It's 1982.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they weren't counting on the fact that there were like fumes building up inside of that prosthetic.
Oh God.
So when they light the fire to have the flame below the camera lens, it ignites that shit. And there's an explosion on set.
Oh my God.
Nobody got hurt, but like they had to hurry up and put the body out, and it had to be fixed. And it kind of shot that day of shooting for that effect. So the one that you see in the movie isn't necessarily like the original one. There are parts of it that's the original one, but parts of it got caught on fire. And like the best part was John Carpenter on one of the special features on that Blu-ray. I can't recommend that Blu-ray enough. John Carpenter's talking about how Rob Bottin's standing there just watching it burn, and he's like, "Put it out, dummy!"
Oh my God.
It's amazing. But like stuff like that looks so good. It looks so far beyond what other things looked like at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And while now, to me, that's a huge plus, I think part of the initial pushback this movie gets is related to maybe some of that shit looking too good.
Right.
I don't know if people were ready for that, like the mass public. I don't know if they were ready to see that yet.
And that's weird because this came out the same year as The Fly.
Right.
And that movie is very jarring with its special effects as well.
Agreed. Although I think this takes it maybe to just like that little bit.
Right.
It's just that little bit further.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing that, aside from all the stuff Rob Bottin did, which all looked great, there was one other group of people that had to do some stuff on this film, and that's to make the opening credits and the UFO.
Right.
And that was model maker Susan Turner and John Walsh. They developed like the opening computer simulation shit for Escape from New York.
Mm-hmm.
All the pre-credit stuff and like the way the thing burns in at the beginning.
Right. The classic, The Thing title that was from the original. Yeah.
Yep. All of that was done by them, by John Walsh and Susan Turner.
Okay.
She made that model. And then he rigged up a thing where basically to make that work, he was lighting trash bags on fire.
Okay.
And they were set up in a thing so that as they burned away, it made the logo, the title of the thing
start to
show
peel.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's burning trash bags.
Okay, I did not know that. That's actually very interesting.
Yeah. So that's where we're at for effects on this movie. I think they are, for the 80s, man, this might be the best.
Right,
I don't know that it gets better. I'm a big fan of the effects in Day of the Dead. And there were some things that Savini and Nicotero did on that movie with like being able to make things that were remote and animatronic that are pretty incredible.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this is just that step above, man. And part of it is, you know, in addition to the genius of Rob Bottin, you have like fucking Stan Winston working on this film out of necessity. And
so
they spent, you know, $1.5 million on the fucking effects.
Right. So all your checks are, you know, checked, and I meant all your boxes are checked and you're good to go.
Yeah. So we've got Dean Cundey making everything look good. We've got Rob Bottin giving him the shit to look good. We've got John Carpenter and a fucking incredible cast making a film that I think's a masterpiece. So this is a huge hit, right?
I would think so.
I would too. Not so much.
Right.
So The Thing was regarded at the time as a failure. Absolute failure.
That like in today's mind, that's unbelievable.
I agree. $15 million budget, It grossed $19.8 million in North America.
Okay.
That's not great. Did it lose money? No.
Right.
No, it didn't lose money. But it certainly didn't make a bunch of money.
Right.
And they had kind of hired John Carpenter, like we talked about earlier, because he makes movies for not a lot of money, and then they make a lot of money.
Right.
Not so much with this one. So why didn't it make money? There's a few reasons. What do you think?
I think it was because it did not appeal to the majority of moviegoers. And I would think probably the movies that came out during it, like around the same run, probably overshadowed it.
I would think that you are absolutely on the right track. So there's not like one thing. There's nothing you can look at and say, oh, this is what's wrong. Oh, you know what we didn't talk about? Hold the fucking phone. Before we talk about how it was a fucking failure at the theater, we need to talk about Morcone's score.
Okay, yeah, we didn't talk about that.
His score is really fucking good in this movie.
Yeah.
Really fucking good. Now, I don't expect people to know Morcone. You know what I mean? Like, he's not.
Yeah.
It's not something where you're gonna be like, oh, I know him.
Right. Yeah. He's like with Danny Elfman, of course.
Right. So Danny Elfman's like pop culture now.
Yeah.
But Morcone did so many like spaghetti westerns. He was Sergio Leone's guy.
Mm-hmm.
He worked on A Fistful of Dollars. He's just, his history in making those films, the sound of those films, the sound of the spaghetti western, Once Upon a Time in the West, he's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a huge get for John Carpenter to be able to bring him in. He also did like the Sergio Corbucci films. He was also the guy that Dario Argento would go to, going all the way back through essentially his whole career.
Right. And like all those films are like scored very well. Like, I mean, Suspiria is amazing.
Suspiria is amazing. Now, Suspiria is the one that I don't think he did.
Oh, yeah, right, because the Goblins did that. Yeah, I apologize.
Yeah, Goblin did that. But he did do, like, Bird with the Crystal Plumage. He did Cat o' Nine Tails. Like, a lot of his, like, thriller movies.
Right.
But, so, he was a fucking renowned composer, and like he even in later years, like recently, was approached to do things like Inglourious Bastards.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he did a song for Django Unchained. Like Tarantino loves him,
right?
For the same reasons I do, and it's mostly because he did all those fucking Leone movies. But yeah, he's beloved. Morcone is just beloved, and there's a sound that you expect from him, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here's the thing: Morcone didn't make a soundtrack that really sounds like Morcone.
Yeah,
he made a soundtrack that sounds like John Carpenter.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Part of that was because, well, there were a few reasons. The first reason being he watched some of John Carpenter's films and saw that he was someone who scored his own shit, and he tried to make things that he thought John Carpenter would like. And the other piece of it was, I think that he saw an opportunity to do other stuff. Now, there are things that he did. There's part of the score for this movie that is like big strings and violins and stuff that sound good, but that's not the main stuff. And the main stuff is really kind of atmospheric synth stuff.
Yeah.
That's reminiscent of Carpenter. And part of the reason this thing sounds like Carpenter is because part of it is John Carpenter.
Right.
Morricone gets credit for the whole thing, but John Carpenter wrote some of it.
Mm-hmm.
And John Carpenter kind of pieced together. Morricone did like a real orchestral and a synth version and a version that was blended together. So like essentially 3 different takes for Carpenter to listen to.
Right.
And then John Carpenter kind of pieced that together into what he wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, the soundtrack on a movie is always important. And in this case, with it being Morricone, I can't believe I almost skipped over it because he's fucking amazing. And it's another piece that goes into how this movie should have been fucking successful at the time. And it wasn't, because you're dumping money into having like one of the most prolific people to write a score for a film doing it for this film.
Right. Exactly. Like the sound of the do during like the quiet moments where everything feels claustrophobic and the paranoia is running rampant within the facility. It just adds to the feeling of just dread and just like the unknown, because you don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know if, Joe Schmo next to you is going to pop and turn into an alien.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an atmosphere, and so many things went into that. So that's another reason why I look at this film as being so amazing, is the atmosphere that's created. There are so many little things that go into it. Little things like just knowing that there's like exposed piping running across the ceiling makes everything inside those buildings feel a little more claustrophobic.
Right.
The soundtrack makes it feel a little more claustrophobic. The way it's lit. And then the idea that there's this thing that the person you're talking to might not even be that person. All that shit, like Carpenter weaves all that shit together so well. It's so good. So it should have been a fucking hit movie. Now, John Carpenter, earlier I talked about how he made a lot of demands, right?
Mm-hmm.
There were things that he wanted. One of his very specific demands from the beginning was that there not be any outside photography allowed of any of the special effects.
Okay.
And I understand what his logic was there. Because he looked at the shit, I think he realized what he had his hands on, that like, oh, this is like some next level shit. I don't want it to leak.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was the wrong decision.
Right.
But I understand why he did it.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a big thing for him, was that there be no pictures on set, that none of that shit get out.
Mm-hmm.
That held true all the way up to when they were doing like show reels for theater owners and exhibitors, right?
Right.
They put a 20-minute piece together to show them that like this movie is not like some low budget shit. Like we're not hiding the effects from you because they suck. And even with that, he still hid so much back. And this is just the only people who are going to see this are exhibitors.
Right, exactly.
And he still held it back. It did not great with test audiences.
Mm-hmm.
People did not like that they didn't know who the thing was at the end. So that didn't go well. They changed so many things in the marketing. The original tagline is so good. The original tagline for this movie should have stayed the tagline for this movie. Like, Alien, everybody remembers in space, no one can hear you scream, right?
Right, yeah.
The original tagline for the thing was, man is the warmest place to hide.
Oh, that is so good. That is so good.
Do you know what the actual tagline they used was?
No.
The ultimate in alien horror.
Oh my god. That literally sounds like a movie that would be on a Walmart shelf and it would never appear anywhere else.
It sounds like you're trying to trick me.
Right. That actually sounds like one of those Nigerian rip-off movies.
Yeah. Like, especially if everybody had just seen Alien a couple of years before.
Right.
I don't know that this is the ultimate in alien terror.
Right.
I think I probably just saw the ultimate in alien terror. John Carpenter hated that so much that he made a last-minute appeal to try to get the tagline changed to "Who Goes There," which is also shitty.
Right.
But somehow less shitty than the ultimate in alien terror.
Right. At very least, Who Goes There is linked to the source material.
Right. So Carpenter did Letterman the week before the film came out.
Mm-hmm.
Fangoria, because they had hidden the thing. And so here's where I think that I think he fucked up a little bit, is like, you want that monster, that shit looks so cool. And there's so many like cool things in the movie, like cool fucking effects. Right. You should have leaked something, one of them.
One of them. Like the Norris thing. That's the most jarring one. If you just show the face and like the tentacles coming down from its jaw, like its neck, like when it's up and like standing.
Yeah.
Like, that could have sold all the people in Fangoria. Yeah.
Instead, Fangoria ran a contest encouraging readers to submit drawings of what they thought the thing would look like. With the winner getting a trip to Universal Studios.
Come ride Jaws.
Yeah, and they did like an opening day screening in Hollywood with Elvira. And you got free admission if you dressed up as a monster.
Right.
Like, just, that's all bad. But that's not the problem. Like, that's a problem, but that's not the problem. That's not the thing that I think hurt it the most. But I do think it was a fuck up to not have at least one of the effects displayed on the cover of Fangoria. Mm-hmm. Because I think any one of these effects, and I mean, you could literally throw a dart, like pick one.
Yeah.
Any single one would have sold more people on the movie.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest problem I think it had, so I think it's an A and B. The critics fucking shit all over this movie. Like, so in the early 80s, movie critics were way more important than they are now.
Yeah.
And like the genre print media was way more important. So you had like Superfantastic and Starlog and Fangoria, all these fucking magazines that if you're into that shit, you're probably reading. You also had, every major city had its big movie critic guy. Like everybody knows Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel from their TV show.
Right.
But before that, they were just, two guys who were the film guy for their newspapers.
Right. Even then, like people sometimes rely just on the newspaper guy.
Right. And so Roger Ebert, I mean, he didn't shit on it as bad as other people did. But he said that it didn't offer anything beyond special effects, which is wild to me. Because I think this movie offers a ton of shit outside of the special effects.
Oh, absolutely. Like just like everyone's squabbling and then just the fear, like the whole, going back to the atmosphere of the film gets the audience locked in because like they don't know what's going to happen next. And then there's a lot of stuff that's happening off screen that you're unaware of. And then when it appears on screen, you're like, holy shit,
Yeah, man. There's so many levels to the film, and I think the fact that a bunch of critics just latched onto the fact that, this thing's really like, they basically called it like, gore porn.
Right.
And I don't think it's that, especially like, I'm sure a lot of these guys, if they would have been able to be fast forwarded to see like anything that came out in the early 2000s, like High Tension or Hostel or even, the mainstream shit like Hostel or Saw.
Yeah.
So much gorier than what's here.
Exactly.
I mean, obviously it's a different time, but yeah, the critics really just kind of took a shit all over this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that hurt it.
Right. You could even say like it was ahead of its time.
It was absolutely ahead of its time. It's proven that. I think it's proven that time and time again. I think all those reviews and the performance of the film at the box office took its toll on John Carpenter.
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of see it. I mean, you see that happens after this. So the critic response is a piece of the problem.
Mhm.
The changing of that tagline is a fucking problem. Not showing any like stills, anything from the movie is a problem. But none of those are probably the biggest problem. Like I said, it's a 1A, 1B. The critics is rough.
Yeah.
The other problem is, boy, a lot of shit came out in 1982.
Yeah, absolutely.
Specifically, a lot of shit came out the same week and in weeks around when The Thing came out. Now,
Mhm.
I personally think if they would have shelved this movie for 6 months, not even, I don't know that they would have even had to shelve it for 6 months. I think if they would have held this movie back, so the movie comes out June 25th, 1982.
Mhm.
If they would have held it back until September week, the equal weekend in September.
Like close to Halloween.
Right toward the last weekend in September, right?
Yeah,
As October's rolling in, people want to see a scary movie. And you'll be far enough removed from the things it was competing against. E.T.
Yep.
came out the week before
Mhm.
and was an enormous fucking hit.
Yeah, you had the commercials behind it, the merchandising, and like just the fact that it's Steven Spielberg.
Right, and so you have this like wholesome alien film that's like a kid's film, but it's a family film, and like people are just drawn to it with this like kind of adorable, ugly alien. That there's that whole thing going on in the theaters. Also, if that wasn't enough, that you're trying to put out an alien film up against that alien film that at the time was on its way to being the most successful movie of the world.
Mhm.
You have Poltergeist in the theaters.
Right? Yeah.
And Blade Runner debuts the same week as The Thing.
Jesus Christ. So like it's actually very interesting with Poltergeist because like so you got your horror fix there, but then also it's a PG movie. So kids can go see it. Like, it's
But
not,
that's the thing. Kids weren't going to see fucking Poltergeist either because the kids were all at E.T.
Oh yeah, that's true. True.
The kids eventually go to see Poltergeist. I mean, so during opening weekend, it made $3.1 million. It was on 840 theaters. So it averaged out about $3,700 a theater. It was the number 8 film of the weekend behind Poltergeist. Poltergeist only pulled 4.1 million.
Okay.
But Poltergeist was in its 4th week of release.
Mm-hmm.
It fell out. The Thing fell out of the top 10 grossing films after 3 weeks. And now I realize that's like, people hear that and that's normal. That wasn't the case then.
No, of
Like,
course not.
Shit stayed for a while, especially if you were like a summer film. If you were a movie that was coming out in the summer, boy, you expected to run for most of the fucking summer. And Blade Runner came out as the number 2 film that weekend. It took home 6.1 million. And it went on to earn 33.8 million. And E.T. was the number 1 film like the fucking whole summer.
Right.
So you've got a movie that now looks like a critical failure and a commercial failure. And that year had been filled with like fantasy films and science fiction films, like Conan the Barbarian's that year. Mad Max 2 is that year.
Mm-hmm.
Star Trek Wrath of Khan,
Right.
Tron, all that shit's that year. But the biggest hurt for it is, so if you're into a science fiction movie, Blade Runner's in the theater.
Yes.
If you're into a horror movie, Poltergeist is in the theater.
Right, exactly.
If it shouldn't affect it because it's a fucking kids movie, but there's another alien movie in the theater,
Mm-hmm.
and it's E.T. and it's everywhere. So I think it just fell into this black hole of, well, Who's going to care about The Thing? And in all of that mess and all of that noise of Poltergeist and Blade Runner and E.T., nobody knows what the fuck The Thing is.
Absolutely.
Nobody knows. Essentially, you're banking on people being like, oh, John Carpenter made a movie.
Right, exactly.
So I think a lot of its failure has a lot more to do with Universal Pictures failing at their job than it did anybody who had a hand in making this fucking movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at that point, like, I don't think they cared because they were too consumed with E.T.
Yeah, I feel like anybody could have looked at that and saw that was a bad weekend to release.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
they should have pulled it and put it back out later. But they didn't, and you can't go back and change it.
Mm-hmm.
The impact that all this shit had on John Carpenter, like I said, you could see it. It was, I mean, if you look at what he does after it, he's got like a little dip in his career, and then he eventually makes movies he wants to make. You know, I think that's really the change that happens in it, is he goes back to like, well, I don't need to be a studio guy. I was pretty good at doing what I was doing before I was. And he makes some of my favorite shit that he does after this, like in his rebound from it.
Oh, yeah.
But like he lost out on Firestarter.
Okay.
Because of The Thing.
Mm-hmm.
He had been given a multi-film contract at Universal, right?
Yeah.
He was a studio guy. He had reached that point where he was a contracted studio director. Universal bought him out.
Man.
In an 1985 interview with Starlog, he said, I was called a pornographer of violence, and I did not think the movie would be received that way.
Damn. That's like so disheartening, especially like coming from the studio that literally started like Movie Monsters.
Yeah. It's wild, man. That all of that comes from this film. So all is not lost though, because the film finds its audience, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Home video ends up being a friend to The Thing. It takes a while to hit VHS, but when it does, it's successful. It finds a home on cable TV at a time when cable TV was desperate for content. So
I'd like to see the TV version of that movie.
So I don't even know if it was that part of cable TV where it really took hold.
Oh, like HBO, Cinemax, Showtime kind of thing.
Yeah. I think it was. I remember like being at friends' houses when I was a kid. We didn't have HBO when I was a kid, but my friends did.
Right.
And I remember specifically seeing The Thing like a couple of times on TV as a kid.
Right.
And then it eventually gets a DVD release in 1998, and there's a really good documentary. It's another thing that I watched for this called Terror Takes Shape. That was filmed around that time. That's the other thing, is there's the amount of like documentary stuff and fan base stuff that exists for this movie kind of showed that there was this fan base for it. And part of it is that it doesn't age poorly. Like, you can watch it in 1998 and it still looks good. You can watch it in 2020 and it still looks good.
Right.
And now it's not, against E.T.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just against your own personal taste. And so it's definitely found its way back around. And you can see when Carpenter talks about it now that he knows, like, he won the long game.
Right.
And I mean, think about it. So it didn't make a lot of money in the theater, but he got bought out of his Universal contract, so he didn't like lose money. And it, like, all the releases that it's had between DVD and Blu-ray, and I think it's been merchandised a little bit.
Yeah. I know Mondo did a lot of stuff. I know they made a board game about it. There was a video game, same name as The Thing. There was a lot of stuff that, pop culture latched on to the film.
And I'm sure John Carpenter loves that there's a video game because he's a video game guy.
Oh yeah, actually I played that game. It was actually pretty good for the time.
Yeah? Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad it was good.
Yeah.
So all in all, I think at the end of the day, like the Thing wins overall. Like Poltergeist and Blade Runner are both pretty iconic.
Yeah.
But I don't know that there are a lot of people like sitting around talking about the merits of E.T.
Right, exactly. No, I don't think so. I think the only thing that's talked about E.T. is the shitty Atari game.
That gets more press than anything else now. And for a minute, when Steven Spielberg changed all the guns to walkie-talkies,
yes,
that got press. But there's like a long game and a short game. And I mean, the Thing at the end of the day didn't make a fucking.
No,
even
of course not.
If you take all the money the Thing made and put it in a pile, it's not even like a tenth of what E.T. made overall.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But I'm of the opinion that it's probably the best special effects for the decade of the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be the best looking John Carpenter movie.
And one of the best remakes.
It is maybe the best remake of any movie ever, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And because it brought something new to the table.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a rehash of something that was already there. It was a completely new idea, and it was innovative.
I 100% agree.
Man, do you have any last thoughts or anything you want to say about the Thing or anything else related to it?
Well, I mean, other than the fact that, I do believe that, I think this is probably one of the best John Carpenter movies, even though I love Halloween probably a little bit more than The Thing. I do stress to people that, since we're close to Halloween, I would definitely make The Thing one of the movies that's on your watch list, because this film is amazing. And I think that, I know there's a lot of eyes on it, but I think there should be more eyes on it.
Yeah, man, I 100% agree. If you somehow have never watched this movie, watch it. Like, there are movies that I'll be very honest about how bad they are. There are movies I love that I'll be like, oh man, I really like this movie, but I get that people think it's shitty. This movie is like top tier sci-fi and top tier horror. And I would go as far as to say, while it's not specifically a thriller, it's also like top tier thriller, because there's the element of like, who is the Thing? What has the Thing taken over? That's a very like psychological thriller aspect to something that is also like a monster movie.
Right, because 100% of it is done off camera. Like, you only get a hint that somebody gets taken over is literally when the dog walks into one room and you see a shadow turn to the door when the dog walked in. So you, like, during the whole film, you do not know who's who, what's what. And like, even at the end of the movie, you don't know. I mean, there's theories of who's actually the Thing, or even if there was a Thing at the end, who knows? But at the end of the day, you're just left like in the unknown.
Yeah, man, it's a great movie. If John Carpenter hadn't made so many good movies, I would probably say it was his best movie. For almost any other director, this would have been their best movie. It's a fucking amazing film, and if you haven't seen it, watch it.